There are many paths in life, many roads to choose from, but only one of them leads to eternal life. Jesus offers a new way and invites us along to welcome others, to live with integrity, to share the good news that He alone is the way, the truth, and the life. If you have Him, you have all you need. There is no other way.
As you know, we've been working our way through the Sermon on the Mount. The series is called The Way because Jesus is introducing a new way of thinking, a new way of living, a new way of believing, a new way of being. He says, you've heard things done and taught this way, but I say to you there's a new way. We've been looking at it carefully, phrase by phrase, as he introduces us to the way. I want us to look this morning at Matthew chapter 7, beginning at verse 12 and ending at verse 12. And somebody just thought, that's one verse. We're getting out early. Have you met me? Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. You remember learning that when you were a kid? Grandma, mom, teacher taught you that was, what did we call it? The golden rule. That's the golden rule. It has a historical reason for that name, but I think a more meaningful reason is it is the golden rule because it trumps all the other rules. You get this one figured out, the others kind of fall into place. The golden rule. This morning I want us to think about the golden way. Each Sunday we've been looking at part of the way, and this morning, the golden way. Because the golden rule is more than a cute saying, it's actually a kingdom principle. Remember, as Jesus introduces us to the way, he is introducing his kingdom. He's saying, I am the king, and if you're going to live this life with me, then you're going to have to be my subject. He's the king, and we follow him. He is the rabbi, and we learn from him. He is the shepherd, and we follow him. This is the way. And so he introduces this kingdom. And within this introduction, there is this golden rule. It's much more than just a kid saying. It is a kingdom principle. It is a way of life. So I want us to spend a good bit of time this morning digging into the golden way. First, notice that the golden rule has a context. And one of the problems with doing the Sermon on the Mount the way we do it is we pick one verse out of the sermon and we look at that one verse. And the reason that's a problem is to fully understand that one verse, you have to see it in the context. In other words, that day Jesus preached one sermon. He didn't preach 5 verses and then say, okay, take a break and we'll come back and we'll do 5 verses and then let's take a break and come back and let's do the golden rule and then that's the way we look at it. But for him, this was a flowing thought. And so for us to fully understand it, we need to understand the context of the Golden Rule. And one of the reasons that that is so important is because we will not fully understand what Jesus meant by it without seeing the fuller context. As a matter of fact, the first word of this verse triggers us to do that very thing. You see that first word in the English Standard Version, the word is so. In some of the other translations, it is therefore. One of the translations leaves that word out, which is a bad translation because that word is in the Greek. So, therefore. In other words, in order to understand this verse, it's got to be attached to everything that he has been saying thus far. He's built a case, if you will, and this is the summary statement of the case. If you jump back in the immediate context, beginning at chapter 7, verse 1, he talked to us about not judging from a condemning perspective, not judging as a hypercritical person or as a hypocritical person, but he told us to judge as a way of helping someone get that speck out of their eye, as a way of being helpful and guiding someone. And how do we juggle all that? That's complicated. Well, here's what you do. You ask and you seek and you knock. You pray it through. So, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. You see, the immediate context seasons the statement. But I want to suggest to you this morning that there's more to it than just the immediate context, because I believe that to fully understand it, you have to see it in the whole sermon. A good sermon has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. In Jesus' sermon, the introduction was basically a poem that we call the Beatitudes. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the poor. Blessed. He went through all of those. And then he enters into his sermon. And as soon as he gets that sermon started, he mentions that he has not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them, to complete them. And then he shows us a whole new way of living, a way of fulfilling and completing the law and the prophets by following Jesus. So now we are actually at the end of the body of the sermon. After this verse, the rest of chapter 7 is the conclusion of the sermon. After this verse, he starts comparing things. He compares two gates and two paths and two trees and two kinds of people and those who believe and those who don't. That's the conclusion. So at the beginning of his sermon, he mentions fulfilling the law and the prophets. At the end of the body of the sermon, he says it again. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. It bookends the body of the sermon because that is the point. You cannot keep the law by thinking of it as rules and regulations and do's and don'ts, but the way you please God is by serving the King and living the way that he is introducing to us. That fulfills the point and the purpose of the law. The Golden Rule has a context, and we can't afford to overlook that. Then I want you to see this morning that the Golden Rule is often misunderstood. It's often misunderstood. It's misused, it's misapplied, it's often misunderstood. Sometimes you'll talk to folks about, are you a Christian? Well, I try to live right. I keep the Golden Rule. I teach my kids the Golden Rule. And many people think That's Christianity. I keep the golden rule. I try to do right, so that's got to be good. Remember, it's a golden rule, not a golden ticket. You remember Willy Wonka? Willy Wonka, the best movie ever made. Not Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's not the best. The best movie ever made was Willy Wonka. In those movies, in that story, Charlie gets the golden ticket, and if you have the golden ticket, you get entrance into the factory. Many folks think the golden rule is like the golden ticket. If I keep the golden rule, then I'm in. Folks, realize the golden rule was spoken to people who were already considered disciples. The golden rule is not how to get into the kingdom, but it is, once you're in the kingdom, how do you live like Jesus? Here's the golden rule. It's often misunderstood. You know, when we were kids, or maybe, let's do it this way. When you're talking to kids, and a kid does something wrong, let's say a kid hits another kid. What's one of the first things you say? You pull that child that hit somebody, you pull them off to the side and you say, now would you want somebody to hit you? Right? We do that. We use that. And that makes sense. They say, no, I wouldn't want somebody to hit me. And then you say, well, then you don't hit anybody else. It's almost the golden rule. The difference is what's been called the wooden rule, the silver rule, and then the golden rule. The wooden rule says, do unto others as they do unto you. This, by the way, is the way most of our culture lives. You get me, I'm going to get you back. How I react to you is the way you react to me. You turn your nose, snub me in the hallway, you're getting a cold shoulder next time I see you. I'm going to do unto you as you do unto me. And it makes us proud. It makes us a little Texas cocky. That's the wooden rule. The silver rule is what we usually wind up teaching our children. The silver rule is don't do to others what you would not want them to do to you. Now that makes a lot of sense. That is just almost the golden rule. Don't do to others what you would not want them to do to you. Matter of fact, that rule has been around even longer than Jesus' teaching. You can find that rule in almost every culture and every major religion. Many times it was taught long before Jesus. Confucius said that rule. Socrates gave that rule. Don't do to others what you would not want them to do to you. Even the famous Rabbi Hillel said, whatever is hateful and distasteful to you, do not do to your fellow man. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. It's the silver rule. And that's usually how we help kids understand how to treat other people. If you don't want them doing it to you, don't do it to anybody else. But listen carefully what Jesus said, because he took that rule that was already present, and like so many others in the Sermon on the Mount, he turned it upside down. And he presented a whole new perspective. Instead of what you would not want someone to do to you, don't do to them. Now he says, what you would want someone to do, you do. You see the difference? It's easy to say, I wouldn't want you to steal my car, so I'm not going to steal yours. It's easy to be passive and say, I'm not going to do what I don't want you to do. That's just kind of sitting back and being a nice guy. That's pretty easy. Jesus calls us to a whole nother level. where he says, instead of don't do, I'm calling you to do something. Figure out what the other person needs. How do you do that? Well, look and see. What would I want someone to do for me? Not to avoid, but what would I want them to do? And as I'm thinking through what I want people to do for me, that tells me then how I can do for others. The golden rule is often misunderstood. We often settle for the wooden rule or the silver rule. Perhaps you remember the age-old story of the man who sees a scorpion that has fallen into the water by the riverside. And the man reaches down to help the scorpion because scorpions can't swim. The man reaches down to help the scorpion out, and the scorpion stings him and he drops him. He reaches again, tries to help the scorpion stings him again. A passerby says to the man, "Why do you keep doing that? Don't you know it's in his nature to sting?" And the man said, "Yes, but it's in my nature to help. Why should I forsake my nature to take on his nature?" Friends, there is a world around us who functions by the wooden rule. Even the best people around us attempt the silver rule. But Jesus calls us to a new nature, a new way. Not to settle for what we see around us, but to intentionally do for others what we would have people do for us. The truth is, the golden rule sets a high standard. It sets a high standard. Notice the words again. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. Whatever. That's a high standard. You figure out whatever you would want someone to do to you, and that helps you know how to interact with them and what to do for them. This challenged me this week. It challenged me to think, well, what do I want? What would I want someone to do for me? And I want to encourage you sometime this afternoon, let's say sometime before you fall asleep tonight, let that challenge you and make a list. Maybe you write it down, maybe you just think it through. What is it that you want people to do for you? As I wrestled through that list, I kind of dealt with some emotions. I thought, you know what? I want to be liked. But more than that, I want to be respected. So because I want to be respected, that challenges me now to treat others with respect. You know what I want? I want people to defend me when others gossip about me. And I know it shocks you to know that others gossip about me, but they do. Sometimes in our own Sunday school classes. I want someone to defend me, to say, you got it wrong. We're not talking about him that way. And because I want that, that drives me to be more careful in conversations and maybe defend someone else. You know what I want? I want people to assume that what I do is out of good motives, instead of assuming that my motives are wrong. And because that's what I want, I need to be real careful about assigning motives to other people's actions. What I want is to be forgiven. I'm in a weird position. People don't forgive pastors. Pastors are not allowed to make mistakes. I want to be forgiven when I mess up. And that drives me to be more willing to forgive my brother. You know what I want? I want to be heard. I want to be seen as a person, not as a job. And that drives me now to make sure that I see you and hear you for who you are. The golden rule sets a high standard. Would you accept the challenge today of going through a list? Make a list. What is it you want from other people? Because that is going to show you how to interact with them. Because what you want is what you do for them. John chapter 13 at verse 17. Jesus has met with the disciples in the upper room. And although he was the king, he was the rabbi, he was the leader, he was the teacher, he was the one who took off his robe, wrapped himself in a towel, got down on the floor and washed their dirty feet. And then he said to them, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. The silver rule says, I won't do what I don't want someone to do to me. I won't hurt them because I wouldn't want to be hurt. That's easy. The golden rule says we do. We take initiative. Jesus says, blessed are you if you do these things that you know to do. Similarly, James taught us in chapter 1 to be doers of the word in James 1 and 22. To be doers of the word and not hearers only. He said you deceive yourselves when you just listen, but you need to do. The golden rule has a high standard. It says do unto others. Take that initiative, what you would have them do to you. The golden rule works. It's the last thing that I want you to see this morning. The golden rule works, but not like you might expect. Jesus says, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. This summarizes the law and the prophets. When you learn to live by the golden rule, it takes care of all the do's and don'ts. The scripture we read earlier said basically, here's what's most important in life. You love God, you love people, and then at the end of that verse it said, this covers the law and the prophets. The same phrase. When we learn the golden rule, we find that it works, but it might not work the way you expect. Because here's one of the mistakes we make. We think in the golden rule says that I should do to you what I want you to do to me. So what that means is, because I want to go to a Texas Rangers game, I give Lisa a gift of a Texas Rangers game. That way, she will give me a gift of a Texas Rangers game. We think the golden rule is, if I do for you, then I can expect you to do for me. We treat the golden rule like tit for tat. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Friends, that's not the way it works. So what do I mean that it works? The golden rule works, but not like you might expect. It works in that when you live the golden rule, you finally know how to live with integrity, to live within the kingdom. It works not in getting you stuff, but it works in making you the person that Jesus intends you to be. It works because I am finally able to figure out how to treat the people around me. You see, you're not always going to be able to call a counselor to ask for advice, or you won't always be able to check with your mama. You won't always be able to read the latest self-help book, and you can't always Google it or YouTube it. Sometimes you just got to know how to act, and now you've got it with you. You've got the tool in your tool belt wherever you go. You've got the golden rule. Now I know what to do because I can figure out what I would want you to do for me. That tells me how to act, how to treat you. The golden rule works not in the rule of reciprocity, not in you get what you give, but it works in that it helps me know how to please God, to be the man I'm supposed to be. I'll bet when you were a kid, you committed the golden rule to memory. Oh, maybe you didn't practice it. Maybe you didn't study it. But you heard it enough that it's in there. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You committed it to memory. This morning, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to challenge you. Don't just commit it to memory. Commit it to life. Don't just be a hearer of the word, but a doer as well.